All right, welcome in. Time to talk some 49ers football on this weekday afternoon. The Kansas City Chiefs held their Super Bowl championship parade today, and it just drove me crazy because everybody started talking about this rebuilding narrative. Patrick Mahomes said, and I quote, "In our rebuilding year, we're world champs." Who the hell in their right mind thought that Kansas City was rebuilding this year? I don't think anybody with any sort of credibility would say that the Kansas City Chiefs were in a rebuilding year. The Chiefs have a great quarterback in Mahomes himself. They had the best offensive line in football after all was said and done. And they have a game wrecking defensive tackle in Chris Jones, spearheading a defense that's opportunistic to supplement that offense and obviously win a title. Anytime a team has those three pieces, I don't even care if you don't have the tackle. If you have the first two, if you have a great offensive line and a great QB, you're not rebuilding. Imagine if the 49ers said they were rebuilding in 1986, 1987, in between their Super Bowls, obviously, or 1985, even in between the 84 and 88 Super Bowls, or if they said they were rebuilding in between the Super Bowl where they beat the Denver Broncos and then the one in the 94 season when they beat the Cowboys. They weren't rebuilding. They might have been restocking their roster at some key positions, but the core was still there. Joe Montana handed the torch to Steve Young. Great players on offense and defense. I mean, the closest the 49ers could have said that they were coming to rebuilding during their dynastic years was 1991, when they still finished number 2 DVOA in all of football. That was the weird year where they finished 10-6. Actually went through a bunch of quarterbacks. Steve Bono only lost one game as their third string QB. His record was 6-1, and it was a Hail Mary in Atlanta from the Falcons that ultimately prevented the 49ers from making that playoff run. But anyway, here's the article that I saw today. Patrick Mahomes saying that the Chiefs in a rebuilding year were world champs. It's like such a fake rally around the flag effect put in here. It's like, oh, nobody believed in us. It's like, you guys are the Chiefs. You won the Super Bowl a couple years ago. Everybody always crows about Patrick Mahomes. His efficiency has been worlds better than any other quarterback since he broke into the league. 2018 was his first year starting. I don't think anybody with a reasonable mind has said that the Chiefs were rebuilding this year. As long as you have Mahomes, you don't rebuild. As long as the Niners had Montana, it wasn't rebuilding. Steve Young, it wasn't rebuilding. Chiefs weren't rebuilding. And, I bring this to a 49ers show because the way that the Chiefs are built right now, I think directly can teach us lessons about what the 49ers need to do to make sure that they take that next step. You already know my opinion. I gave it this morning on the Lombardi AM Scramble about where the 49ers would be if they had a healthy Purdy. I think they would have beaten the Eagles, but I don't think they would have beaten the Chiefs based on what I saw in the Super Bowl. Kansas City was so balanced down the stretch in the second half. They had the Shanahan formula, balanced football, offense, defense, but also within the context of just the offense, they passed the ball and they ran the football. They had the Shanahan formula, but with better personnel at QB and at offensive line. If you're better at QB and O-line, I don't think that you're going to lose. And the 49ers, even if they had Purdy, and even if Purdy was playing at a sensational level, I don't think anybody's going to put him ahead of Mahomes. But that's besides the point. I think that the Chiefs' offensive line is where they had a market advantage over everybody that they played this year, especially the Super Bowl. That balance, which was in part perpetuated, obviously, by that offensive line, the 6.1 yards per carry, no sacks given up to Philadelphia. That was a clinic in both pass blocking and run blocking, pass protection and run blocking on point for Kansas City. And the 49ers, even with Brock Purdy, were clearly short on the defensive tackle and the O-line front. Look at the three things that mean that Kansas City cannot possibly be reloading. QB, O-line, defensive tackle, Chris Jones, dominant across those three. The 49ers, even if Purdy is playing at an all-pro level, and obviously towards UCL, so that wasn't possible, didn't have the final two. clearly short at defensive tackle and offensive line. And, just fittingly, this is what I've written about most recently on The Athletic. Here we have state of the O line, state of the D line. Those are the two most recent pieces that Matt Barrows and I have come out with. If we go to state of the D line, this was written just a couple days ago. We have this. We have a lot of red, especially below the horizontal dividing line. That is an anemic pass rush and a bad run stopping situation at defensive tackle. Their best player is Eric Armstead, but he was hurt for a lot of this season. Meanwhile, 49ers doing okay at edge. Not great, but okay. But, you could see here, there's a lot to make up for a defensive tackle. And today came out with the offensive line piece, which is right here. We have Jake Brendel, the center. And we could look at the metrics. They're good enough. You got a lot of blue amongst the starting offensive linemen, but you're still a little weak at the guard positions because you have two youngsters in Burford and Banks. You need another year of maturation there. And it's fitting because I think that the Kansas City Chiefs needed a couple years of time and maturation for that offensive line to reach the number one level that it was at during the Super Bowl. They were terrible 2 years ago in the Super Bowl, and they were the best in this season against the Eagles. And they retooled essentially the whole front. The only holdover from 2 years ago is Andrew Wiley. He moved from guard to right tackle. But it takes time to build these things. And the 49ers have a big offseason in front of them if they want to address the issues I'm talking about and become true Super Bowl contenders. And the biggest issue, in my opinion, was solving all that red in the defensive tackle category. They have to do better along the interior. And you have a lot of big-time pending free agents. And the top name in the NFC, maybe in the NFL right now along the defensive line, should be Javon Hargrave. This is the Philadelphia Eagles defensive tackle who finished behind only the very, very top guy, Chris Jones, in pass rushing productivity amongst defensive tackles this year. Hargrave is elite, 30 years old, yes, so he's not young anymore, but he's a pending free agent. And the reason that, he should be a focal point this offseason is it's unclear if Philadelphia is going to be able to hold on to him. The Eagles have a lot of pending expenses. That always happens when you have a good team. And this is not necessarily can the 49ers pick up Hargrave because he's going to be really expensive. This is probably a $15 million player this next season, maybe even more. But will the Eagles be able to keep him? Because we have an arms race brewing at the top of the NFC. I think Philadelphia and the 49ers are clearly the two best NFC teams. But Javon Hargrave was, he stirred that drink for Philadelphia last year. 78 sacks as a team. They were okay on run defense, but obviously, that was after picking up a bunch of other guys, but not good enough to beat the Chiefs. They would have been terrible without Javon Hargrave. The pass rush worked because they had that fixture on the interior. If Philadelphia can't keep this player, how do we expect that pass rush to stay as excellent as it was this last year? Conversely, if the 49ers can't pick up an interior defensive lineman, how can we reasonably expect them to be Super Bowl contenders? I don't think we can. So defensive tackle is where I think a lot of this is going to be won and lost next year. And Hargrave is a key chess piece in this whole evolution. Will Philadelphia be able to keep him? How expensive will he be? Will that preclude them from keeping other guys? And what will the 49ers do at defensive tackle? Obviously, Hargrave's a long shot, but last year the 49ers had a pronounced need leaving the NFC Championship game at cornerback. And they went out and they paid Charvarius Ward $14 million a year. This year, I think the pronounced need is obviously at defensive tackle, also along the offensive line. What do they do with Brendel? What do they do with McGlinchey? Those are pending free agents. Maybe they save a little bit of money there. Maybe they, let Colton McKivitz be right tackle. He was a better pass blocker in a smaller sample than McGlinchey last year. Maybe they can retain Brendel on an affordable deal. And maybe if they do have some resources, they go after a guy like maybe not Javon Hargrave, but Daron Payne from Washington, David Onyemata, New Orleans. Both of those players that I just listed, Payne, Onyemata, obviously Hargrave, all three of these guys have done damage against the 49ers in the past. And they need a plus interior pass rusher to pair with Nick Bosa. If you get the right fit on the inside and pair that with Nick Bosa, you can probably go bargain bin at defensive end. Charles Omenihu, you might be able to re-sign him because he didn't finish with that many sacks this year, but he was still generated a lot of pressure. Might have been short in the sack column to really get paid next year. I don't know what Sansa maybe comes going to command. It seemed that he kind of trailed off toward the end of the season. You're counting on a player like Drake Jackson to take the next step at edge. And then somebody like Jordan Willis might come inexpensively for the 49ers. I'll tell you what, though, if you have Bosa and you have one of these three guys, a plus defensive tackle, then you're going to make the other edge rushers look a lot better. The 49ers defensive line was at its best when it had a dominant interior presence in DeForest Buckner. Last time we saw that was in 2019. Now, they wanted Javon Kinlaw to handle this critical role. That's the rising tide that lifts all boats along the defensive line. But obviously, the knee issues for Javon Kinlaw have made it impossible for him to pan out. I was talking on a show the other day about I think the 49ers activated Kinlaw a little too early. I think that they sensed he only had a certain amount of games in his knee because of the fluid buildup there after the ACL reparation. They bring him back against Washington. They bring him back obviously late in the season, but if he only has 2 or 3 games in that knee before he gets bad, why bring him back with 2 or 3 games still to go in the regular season? And he obviously ran out of gas, wasn't really able to anchor on that knee against Philadelphia. But, either way, Kinlaw hasn't been the dominant presence inside that the 49ers have needed. They drafted him after DeForest Buckner was traded for that first-round pick to Indianapolis in the early part of 2020. So the 49ers have to think long and hard about what do we need to do to make sure that we have that stronger interior piece, because I cannot emphasize this enough. And I'll put it back up on the screen again. This right here is not good enough under the horizontal line. Red is bad. Blue is good. Defensive tackles are under the horizontal line. There's a lot of red there. 49ers need that interior pass rush to develop more juice. There are going to be big-time free agents. You ask about the draft. Well, the problem is the 49ers don't pick until the compensatory section of the 3rd round. It's going to be tough to get an impact DT late in that 3rd round where the comp section is. They got 3 picks back to back, essentially, in that 3rd round. I know somebody like DJ Jones was picked in the 6th back in 2017, but took him a few years to get going. I think you need instant impact to be able to run this back and win a Super Bowl next year. And you need that instant impact at defensive tackle if you are the 49ers. Because the Chiefs had it. They won a Super Bowl. They weren't that great anywhere else on defense. And Bolton's a fast linebacker. I guess, they weren't great in coverage. You have Frank Clark on the defensive line, but it's Chris Jones running the defense. So you have Mahomes, you got an O-line, and you have Chris Jones as defensive tackle. Opportunistic defense to go along with a productive offense for Kansas City. And if you compare the 49ers, even if Purdy's healthy, they don't have the line that Kansas City had on offense, and they don't have that defensive tackle piece. So the Chiefs, they definitely weren't rebuilding this year. Don't listen to that garbage. That's just narrative stuff coming out of the parade today. People trying to cover their tracks maybe by dissing the Chiefs a little bit too much earlier this year, acting surprised that this is what they did in a rebuilding year. It wasn't a rebuilding year for Kansas City. They had the pieces, and the 49ers need to make sure that even with all the talent that they have the pieces at the right spots. And I think a big part of that is the interior defensive line. All right, everybody, thanks for joining. Quick show today in the afternoon. Maybe coming on with more a little bit later. Wanted to give you guys some of my thoughts on that Chiefs championship parade, what the 49ers can learn from it. They got to be better on both fronts if they want to win the Super Bowl next season. Thank you, and take care.